The Japanese attack on the United States forces at Pearl Harbor in December 1941 was the first of a series of disasters for the Allies in the Pacific theater of World War II. In rapid succession during the early months of 1942, the Japanese swept through the Philippines, captured Singapore and Hong Kong, and seized the Dutch East Indies. The American possessions of Wake Island and Guam fell to onrushing Japanese forces. They demonstrated the capability to attack with overwhelming force wherever and whenever they wished, and the crippled American Pacific Fleet seemed powerless to stop them. The Japanese threat led the American aircraft industry, most of which was located on the West Coast in California and in Washington, to undertake one of the largest camouflage operations of the war, or any war for that matter. Airplane plants and supporting airstrips were covered in what would appear to an aerial observer to be small American towns. They were dotted with houses and businesses on leafy streets completed with automobiles. Some of the houses featured clotheslines where laundry hung in the breeze. The covering of factory rooftops with simulated towns was a joint effort by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, supporting military units, Hollywood motion picture set designers and builders, and the aircraft manufacturers themselves. They remained in place, officially a secret project, until the late summer of 1945. Since they were secret, few photographs were allowed of them until their existence was revealed. They remain a fascinating example of passive defense through camouflage, as well as a little-known story from the war, except in those cities where they once stood. Though several aircraft manufacturers adopted the scheme, they are often referred to collectively as Boeing Wonderland, the name given to the faux town built on top of Boeing's massive Plant 2 near Seattle, which covered over 26 acres. Here is their story. Welcome back to Geographics. I'm your host, Eric Malachite, and today's script was provided by Larry Holsworth. So be sure to show them some love as you deploy your likes, and do all the things that help keep the eldritch beast that is the YouTube algorithm going. Let's get to it. As the year 1941 drew to a close, the U.S. government banned large public gatherings along the west coast of the United States. The fear of Japanese attack was so rampant that the 1942 Rose Bowl football game was moved from its traditional venue of Pasadena, California, to North Carolina. The internment of Japanese American citizens in camps began in February 1942, out of fear of both Japanese spies and sabotage operations. Japan's successes in the South and Central Pacific created a widespread fear of, if not outright invasion, aerial and naval attacks on the West Coast. These fears were amplified by sporadic attacks. On February 23rd, a Japanese submarine surfaced near Santa Barbara and shelled an oil storage facility, though little damage was inflicted. The next night, a weather balloon caused a panic in Los Angeles. Believing the city to be under Japanese air attack, jittery Army anti-aircraft batteries opened fire. The only damage sustained was from the fragments of exploded aircraft shells falling to the ground. You know what they say, what goes up must come down. In June, another Japanese submarine shelled Fort Stevens, again causing little damage, though it returned to repeat its attack the following night. That same month, the Japanese seized islands in the Aleutians chain of the Alaska Territory. The Japanese demonstrated their ability to launch float planes from submarines, flying bombing missions over Oregon, again with little in the way of damage to the Americans, other than fostering fear. All of these operations were small in scope, but they fed the rumors of larger Japanese operations to come. It had already become clear to America's war planners and strategists that the war was largely to be fought in the air. At the time, America's largest aircraft manufacturers were concentrated in 5 states, with California alone holding 44% of all airplane construction. Most of the facilities in California were in the southern part of the state, and nearly all were within 10 miles of the coastline. That put them in range of Japanese aircraft carrier raids, as well as in the range of some of the larger naval guns of the day. The Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor with aircraft launched from 6 aircraft carriers, which had managed to journey across the Pacific to within 275 nautical miles of their target. They accomplished their voyage undetected, despite the U.S. military being under a war alert. If they conducted a similar mission against the United States West Coast, they could irredeemably cripple the American airplane industry at a time when it was needed the most. Such was the threat confronting American war planners in early 1942. Boeing Wonderland is a pretty cool story. You know what isn't cool though? Discovering how much of my personal information was with data brokers. And like the talented folks who disguised our airfields in World War II, our friends at DeleteMe have been protecting my personal information from unwanted and unscrupulous actors on the internet. Since partnering with DeleteMe, 19 data brokers have been stopped from using my personal information, with a grand total of 34 listing removals from sites owned by those data brokers. Data brokers are companies that snatch up your personal info and sell or rent that information for a nominal price. And it's not just social media websites. They get this information from all over the internet, including government public records. The information these companies had included my name, age, past addresses, family members, marital status, and my wife's name as well. And with DeleteMe, I was able to get it removed from these websites no problem. Now, to be honest, every one of these data brokers has an opt-out process that you can follow. But if you're like me and you don't have several hours to set aside every day to follow that process for every website that has your information, DeleteMe will help you keep your data more secure by doing all of that for you. All you have to do is sign up, follow the instructions in the welcome email, and tell them what information you want them to remove. So now is the time to safeguard your online privacy. Get 20% off DeleteMe US consumer plans when you go to joindeleteme.com/geographics and use promo code Geographics at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/geographics, code Geographics. The Douglas Aircraft Company operated 3 large plants in Southern California in 1941 at El Segundo, Long Beach, and its main facility at Santa Monica. Before the war, Douglas built one of the most successful aircrafts in history, the DC-3, as well as the Douglas Dauntless, a dive bomber used to great effect by the U.S. Navy at the Battle of Midway. Bombs dropped from Dauntless bombers were responsible for the destruction of all 4 Japanese carriers during that American victory. In 1941, Douglas was still run by Donald Douglas Sr., its founder. Douglas was convinced that the war was coming for the United States earlier than most, and he began to develop a means of camouflaging his Santa Monica plant and adjoining Cloverfield. No, not the movie. He assigned the task to one of his senior engineers, who in turn hired California architect H. Roy Kelly to undertake the task. Kelly, whose forte was building design, hired landscape architect Edward Huntsman Trout to assist him. Kelly decided to base the design of his camouflage scheme on the nearby housing development known as Sunset Park. They connected their simulated street grid to the real grid in Sunset Park, and Kelly designed ranch-style houses to match those of the existing community. To assist them in making the vision a reality, they turned to nearby Warner Brothers Studios, which had a long-standing commercial relationship with Douglas Aircraft. Warner Brothers set builders used kitchen wire and burlap to cover the terminal, aircraft hangars, and parking lot of Cloverfield. They stretched the burlap base over chicken wire, supported by several hundred poles, and covered, according to the Los Angeles Times, over 5 million square feet of space. The runways were painted to resemble part of the street grid of the fake town, and were so effective that pilots attempting to land at Cloverfield frequently failed to locate the airport. After the American victory at the Battle of Midway, the threat of a carrier-based attack on the American West Coast abated, and the runways were returned to their pre-war appearance. But the camouflage over the buildings and over the Santa Monica plant remained throughout the war. Warner Brothers and Douglas applied similar treatments to the plants at El Segundo and Long Beach. At Douglas, construction of the artificial towns included the creation of houses appearing to be still under various stages of construction, in order to further the appearance of the town as an extension of existing Sunset Park. Prying Japanese eyes from above would see an American town with the appearance of prosperity and growth, rather than the concealed factory building the airplanes which were strengthening their enemy and depleting their own forces. During the German bombing raids on Royal Air Force bases in Britain in 1940, American observers had noted the extensive camouflage operations used to conceal them from aerial observation. Britain concealed its bases by giving them the appearance of farms, often with structures which, when viewed from above, appeared to be hedgerows. Plane sheds were disguised as barns, fuel tanks as silos, etc. One such observer was John Omer Jr., who, as early as March 1941, had recommended similar camouflage camouflage schemes for several U.S. bases, including Wheeler Field in Hawaii. His recommendations were not adopted due to financial constraints. Wheeler Field was subsequently decimated during the attack on Pearl Harbor. In 1942, financial constraints no longer applied. Omer was assigned by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers the task of concealing California's aircraft industry. Stationed at March Field in Riverside County, just outside of Los Angeles, Omer first demonstrated his theories by concealing March Field itself from aerial observation. To assist him in building sets which appeared to be something which they were not, he turned to a pool of talent readily at hand in Southern California. The great Hollywood studios, which had more experience creating visual illusions than anywhere else in the world, joined his project. Technicians, set designers, set builders, cameramen, and other experts from MGM, Paramount, Disney, Columbia, 20th Century Fox, and other studios rallied to the cause. Part of March Field became a small farm with animals, a barn, and a hayloft. Eventually, Omer and the Hollywood studios camouflaged over 30 West Coast military facilities, including among them Mills Field near San Francisco. Today, Mills Field remains in operation as San Francisco International Airport. March Field remained in operation as a training facility for the duration of the war and is an operational air reserve base today. After proving his method, Omer turned his attention to the aircraft construction industry. At the same time as he was developing camouflage for March Field, Omer and his teams directed their attention to Southern California's aviation industry, including plants owned by Lockheed in Burbank and several others nearby. North American Aviation, which built the B-25 bomber used in the famed Doolittle raid, was located in Inglewood. Another important target to disguise was Consolidated Vultee, which became Convair in 1943, not to be confused with Con Air. Yeah, had to slip in a Nicolas Cage joke. The company built both the heavy B-24 bomber and the PBY Catalina seaplane, both of which proved critical to U.S. Navy operations in the Pacific during the war. Several additional manufacturers operated plants nearby, all of them essential to the war effort. Omer started with Lockheed's Burbank plant. Omer's plan was to conceal these factory buildings under small artificial towns. The towns were erected upon painted camouflage netting which stretched over the roofs of factory buildings. In some cases, parking lots were concealed under wooden platforms. The platforms were then concealed with painted netting. Streets were painted with sign poles erected at intersections. Lawns were painted green in varying shades, with some blotched with brown or entirely brown to indicate neglect on the part of the homeowner. Streets devoid of cars and trucks would be unconvincing, so inflatable automobiles were created and positioned in driveways, parking spaces, and on the roads. Workers would move these cars around at night in case aerial observers managed to overfly the site. The houses and other buildings were of canvas, and though accurate in width and length to then conventional American buildings, they were for the most part only 5 or 6 feet in height. This was because from the altitude of 5,000 feet or more, there is no perception of height of most objects on the ground. Aerial photographs reveal a two-dimensional image with no depth. To create the illusion of multi-story buildings, some were simply raised on platforms. Factory complexes with multiple buildings of irregular height allowed for the creation of hills in the small towns. Painted artificial streets were connected to real streets outside the complex, though with signs and guards controlling access. Shrubs were created using chicken wire and burlap. Chicken wire also provided the trunks and branches of trees. Coated with tar, they were then liberally covered with feathers, which were acquired from the mattress and pillow industry. Workers continued to adjust the site in the towns over the course of the war, removing clothing from clotheslines behind the houses or adding to others. They moved cars, added shrubs, changed flower beds, and made seasonal changes. One problem presented to the set builders and site designers were the ventilation shafts and chimneys, which penetrated the factory's roofs and needed access to the air. They too were disguised as fire plugs or sign poles. In some cases, they penetrated through a house above them and reached clear air as the house's simulated chimney. In others, they were concealed under trees. Throughout Southern California, the Army and the Army Air Force erected active defenses should the Japanese launch an attack on the West Coast. These included coastal artillery designed to defend against seaborne and airborne attacks. All of the fake towns above and surrounding aircraft manufacturing plants also had nearby active defenses should an attack take place. Other than the few mentioned already, no further attacks were directed at Southern California installations throughout the war. The Navy and Coast Guard developed and deployed effective anti-submarine tactics, and by late 1942, few Japanese submarines ventured as far as the Hawaiian Islands, let alone the West Coast. American submarines operating from Hawaii, Midway, and Australia began to choke off Japan's supplies of oil. Dwindling fuel supplies meant that Japanese long-range operations were increasingly unlikely, and Japan switched to a defensive strategy. Yet, the possibility of long-range aircraft conducting hit-and-run raids remained, and the aircraft factories of Southern California stayed hidden under fake towns. The towns were maintained by factory workers and military stationed nearby. Officially, their existence was a secret, but their presence was well known by thousands of workers in nearby communities. Because their existence was officially classified, the cost to design, build, and maintain them has never been accurately determined. Some of the expense was borne by the aircraft company, some by the Army, and some by the cooperating motion picture studio. One story from the war, probably apocryphal, came from Warner Brothers. The studio executives noted that their famed backlot, with rows of large sound stages with distinctive high-arched roofs, resembled aircraft hangars. They feared that any incoming Japanese attack, having failed to find its true target in the Los Angeles area, would direct its unwanted attentions against the studio. Accordingly, they requested their studios be concealed by H. Kelly and his team. There's no record of Warner Brothers ever being concealed under camouflage, though. In the 1930s, the Boeing Company of Seattle, Washington shifted focus from building wood and fabric small aircraft to large multi-engine airplanes of aluminum and other materials. A new Boeing manufacturing plant, designated Plant 2, was completed for this purpose in 1936. It measured about 6,000 square feet in floor space. By 1940, when Boeing expanded operations to meet demand for its B-17 heavy bomber, the plant was expanded to 60,000 square feet under one roof. Expansion continued. By the time the United States entered the war, Plant 2 enclosed 1,776,000 square feet, over 40 acres with 26 acres under one roof. Plant 2 had an irregular roof, which, when viewed from the side, resembled the teeth of a saw blade. A significant part of the roof was glass, making Boeing a daylight plant. In 1941, Philip Johnson served as president of Boeing, having returned to the company after having been banned for collusion with airline carriers in 1937. Along with his compatriot Donald Douglas, he believed the wars in Europe and China would soon impact the United States. Primarily, plans to protect his Plant 2, believed susceptible to Japanese attack, began before the attack on Pearl Harbor. The first plan was to paint the roof black to prevent artificial light from the plant floor from being visible outside the plant at night, marking its location as a target. Not all paint adheres to glass, and several different types of paint were attempted in December 1941 before a suitable mixture was found. Most of the paint was applied by sprayer, and Johnson announced via a company release on December 11th that the process was complete. His announcement was premature. The black paint caused a serious reflection problem for pilots using the nearby airfield. The entire structure required repainting in a shade similar to that used by the US Navy for its warships, called haze gray by its sailors. Yet the plant was still easily discernible from the air, and the workers within the building were endangered by the glass above them. In any attack, shards of glass would rain down from the roof. Finally, the painted glass was backed with multiple layers of plywood to afford some protection. When it was pointed out that Japanese bombs had penetrated several inches of armored steel on battleships at Pearl Harbor, it was clear that attempting to protect the plant with wood was inadequate. It had to be hidden. In May 1942, John Detley, an art director from MGM, was assigned to the Army Corps of Engineers and sent by Omer to camouflage the Boeing plant. Detley arrived in Seattle to considerable fanfare, as he was accompanied by his new bride, Hollywood star Veronica Lake, who was to become one of the most popular pinup girls for American military men. Veronica was soon participating in regional bond drives and appearing at rubber and metal collection sites. Meanwhile, Detley hired a local architectural firm to help him design the camouflage scheme for Boeing Plant 2. His immediate difficulty was again the irregular shape of the building's roof. Any scheme along the lines of those in California California required a flat surface, or at least some flat surfaces, with differentiations disguised as hills. Plant 2's sawtooth roof would have to be flattened somehow. Detley and the Corps of Engineers installed catwalks along the roof, creating level walkways over the peaks. The catwalks were later disguised as sidewalks. Between the catwalks, wooden floors were installed, supported by steel bracing from below. Since much of the platform was wooden, a sprinkler system was installed to protect it from fires. It was on this platform that Detley built his fake town, covering 26 acres with streets, a park, houses, businesses, and the usual enhancements. Building the platform consumed an estimated 1 million board feet of lumber. As had been done in California, Detley looked to nearby neighborhoods and topographic features to allow his town to easily blend in with this surrounding area. Once again, MGM and other Hollywood studios supplied set designers and builders, and other work was accomplished by Corps of Engineers personnel and Boeing employees. The landscape around Plant 2 featured numerous hills and small dales, and the surface of the town above Boeing's plant was scaled to appear the same. Hills of camouflage netting reinforced with chicken wire appeared in the town, which included 53 houses. 2 of these houses were actually built to house people. Boeing Wonderland was protected by anti-aircraft artillery, and the gun crews lived in the town. It was the only one of the fake towns known to have had actual residents. Winds in the area made the deployment of inflatable vehicles unwise, as they were easily buffeted about. The vehicles at Boeing were constructed of wood, and though the length and width were compatible with then American styles, they were of minuscule height. As in California, the houses were mostly less than 6 feet tall at the eaves, and most were closer to 4 feet. The trees, shrubs, lawns, and other landscaping followed the California model. About a dozen garages stood on the site, along with cardboard or wire fences, street lamps, and street signs. Some of the latter bore whimsical names, such as Burlap Boulevard. Workers prowled the roof along the catwalks, performing maintenance, moving vehicles, hanging or removing laundry, and, as in California, performing what Hollywood refers to as dressing the set. Beneath the facade provided by the town, Boeing workers built B-17 heavy bombers, most of which were destined for service in Europe, as well as the early B-29s, which later bombed the Japanese mainland. For most of the ensuing 3 years, they labored beneath the town, aware of its existence as well as the fact that it was officially a wartime secret, the revelation of which could lead to imprisonment. During the years of their existence, Army, Air Force, and Navy planes flew over the towns, photographing them from various altitudes and evaluating them for their effectiveness. Very few of those photographs exist today, and some vanished during the war, their whereabouts never discovered. The Japanese never overflew any of the towns, and thus their effectiveness as camouflage was never tested. In summer 1945, the Japanese Empire was reeling. Its navy had been destroyed, its merchant fleet mostly sunk, and the home islands were under daily bombardment from the air. U.S. Navy battleships and cruisers bombarded Japanese islands with their heavy guns. That month, Boeing confirmed through a company bulletin the existence of the fake town on its roof. When the Seattle Daily Times reported the story, an enthused reporter gave the town the name Boeing Wonderland. In July, the Army Corps of Engineers announced the awarding of contracts to demolish the towns and dispose of surplus materials. Boeing workers were allowed to visit the town on their roof, and several attractive female workers were posed for photo ops. Later, when the town was demolished in 1946, some workers were allowed to collect souvenirs from the roof. The cars and trees were reportedly among the most popular items. We should see if any of them are available on eBay. In a June 1945 article in Boeing News, the company's official newsletter, Boeing estimated the total cost of building Boeing Wonderland was $2 million, with another $2 million to disguise adjacent Boeing Field. That's about $72 million in 2025 dollars. In July 1945, the Corps of Engineers awarded a contract worth $248,861 to a Los Angeles company with a proviso that the town be completely removed within 5 months, a cost of a little under $45 million today. The other towns were dismantled in the same manner, and by the summer of 1946, less than a year following Japan's surrender, they were all gone. Except in the communities where the towns of tiny houses and artificial streets once stood, they were quickly forgotten. Few ever learned of their existence. Late war and post-war news were dominated by stories about bringing the troops home and the creation of new, real towns to house them. Americans wanted real new cars, new roads, and stories of fakes built in support of the war did not appear on the front pages of newspapers. Life magazine ran a photo essay on the camouflage operation, but it was quickly overwhelmed by other stories more pertinent to the times. In the end, events proved that the fake towns were not needed. The Japanese did not attack the American mainland, and by late 1942, aircraft production at inland plants in cities such as Detroit and Wichita surpassed that of the West Coast. Yet during the harrowing early days of the Pacific War, the towns offered some Americans a sense of security. The towns were also a demonstration of what could be accomplished through a joint effort from the US military, its equipment manufacturers, and the skills and talents of the entertainment industry. It was just another example of how the American industry known as Hollywood contributed to the war effort during World War II. And thanks again to Delete Me for sponsoring this video. Remember to follow the link in the description and pin comment to get 20% off your subscription. It's a small price to pay to help keep your private data safe from bad actors. I hope you learned something today, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to deploy your likes, comment a historical monument or place we haven't covered yet, subscribe and ring that bell, and share this video with someone who loves learning about history's most important locations. I'm Eric Malachite, and we'll see you next time.